Welcome back, and let's pick back up with a critically important presentation on data security and shop floor integration with IoT. Our speakers are Peter Pearce and Brian Nichols. Peter is a principal in the consulting practice of Baker Tilly and leads the firm's enterprise solutions and mobility and transportation practices. Brian is a director on Baker Tilly's risk, internal audit, and cybersecurity practice. Please note that Peter and Brian will participate in the Q&A session and roundtable discussion that's scheduled to take place at the end of the next presentation. So please welcome Peter and Brian from Baker Tilly.
Good day, everyone, and welcome to the IoT Experience for Manufacturers, produced by Metal Forming Magazine and the PMA. I'm joined here today by my colleague, Brian Nichols, and I am Peter Pearce from Baker Tilly. I am a principal in our Enterprise Solutions Services practice, and Brian is a director in our Risk and Internal Audit and Cybersecurity practice. Today, we're going to go over quickly Baker Tilly. We're going to talk about our Industry 4.0 model and the relevance to IoT. We're going to discuss our 7-layer security model for IoT and the roadmap for leveraging IoT. Baker Tilly, established in 1931, is the 12th largest accounting and professional services firm in the world. We are a member of Baker Tilly International, which has offices in 146 countries with more than 36,000 professionals, with over $3.9 billion in worldwide revenue. Our consulting practice is focused on assisting our clients with specialized teams. We have a flexible engagement model, and we focus on strategy, execution, and transformational projects. Today, we have nearly 600 consultants serving clients in a variety of industries, as you can see on your screen. In addition to my role in enterprise solutions and services, I lead our automotive and mobility practice for Baker Tilly, as well as our supply chain and manufacturing practice. As you can appreciate, we provide a wide range of services to all different types of clients within this area of industries you see on your screen, with a real specialty on assisting manufacturing companies solve business challenges through the use of modern business technologies, enabling technologies bounded by solid cybersecurity. Today, we're going to focus on the smart factory, which is a component of our supply chain context. As you can see, we have a strategy practice that assists companies all the way from network design to serving their customers through cost to serve and channel strategies. We help clients on the demand side of understanding where you need to manage and support both your inbound demand as well as your supply demand, and yourselves and how you need to go and execute and run your businesses through sourcing and procurement, all the way through customer order management. Today, we are, as I mentioned, going to focus on a key component of this model around the smart factory bounded by Industry 4.0. So Industry 4.0 is the new version of our industry, right? We started in Industry 1.0 through steam engines, through the implementation of production lines, Industry 2.0, through Industry 3.0 in the 70s, which was really applying bits of technology and data processing to managing the manufacturing, to today, which we're calling Industry 4.0, which is everything around the information, data management, connectivity, integration, and optimization of running manufacturing companies. So when you assess your organization, it's important to really understand, well, what are the key components of Industry 4.0? The first area is around software integration. This is all about where you connect and integrate your core business technologies. The business strategy, what modern and leading technologies am I going to use to help and lead and make my company leading class? Am I going to look at digital twins? Are we going to implement 3D printing? Are we going to use advanced technologies? How are we going to deploy robotic processing or RPA? How are we going to manage this massive amount of data that we're collecting? I'm fairly confident that everyone attending this presentation is dealing with all different types of data that's aggregating. But what can we do to really hone in and specialize on this data? Well, let's talk about big data. How can you use the big data and all the information you're collecting and to drive timely insights to make quality, integral business decisions? Today, we're really going to focus on production technology integration. And this is everything about the shop floor and IIoT and connectivity. But we can't forget mobility, right? We need to access our information anytime, any place. product development, are you making the right products? Are you investing in the right products? Are you working with the right customers? So this is all about that supply chain model that we looked at on the prior screen. Are we making the right products to serve our clients? And then robotic automation. How are we using robots from both a automation as well as an integration on the shop floor to help manufacture and automate all different types of business processes as well as manufacturing automation. But today we're really going to hone in on production technology integration. But first, let's understand the 5 levels of maturity within our Industry 4.0 industry model. So let's think about level 1 being immature, maybe on the starting stage of an endeavor, to level 5, which is fully optimized. So where are you within the very aspects of Industry 4.0? We talked about those 7 threads that run through Industry 4.0. Well, where do you gauge and how are you performing? Are you starting? Are you starting to embrace strategy for integration and data management, which is level 3? Are you noticeably improving business through tapping into your IoT devices, getting good quality information from the shop floor, determining, hey, am I really operating to my engineering standards? How are we using connectivity to drive good business decisions? And then fully optimized, how are we integrating everything across the shop floor to really draw and grab information, and so we can mine data and make quality decisions and be notified and apply predictive analytics. So that's world-class, level 5. Where do we sit within the spectrum? So from a production technology integration perspective, number 1, nothing's automated. Everything's manual. There's many occurrences of human error. Is it repeatable? Are we, trial size of innovative products integrated? Minimal, machine-to-machine integration. Human error is still an issue. Define and leverage, the midpoint. Intermediate amount of devices are integrated. M2M communications established, machine-to-machine. Are we using sensors or wearable devices being deployed? Are we noticing a reduction in human error? Number 4, measured and managed. Are we using innovative technology in all the areas of our manufacturing operation? Are we using M2M, machine-to-machine communication for everything on the shop floor? Are we seeing greater improved efficiency, a large reduction in human errors? In level 5, this is the smart factory status, right? Is everything connected? Is interoperability across all machines in place? No human error. Are we receiving efficiencies and optimization? So this is what you take from maturity. Where do you sit within these different areas? Okay. Now, when we look at the whole 8 areas of the maturity model, well, there's a lot of different things we can gauge ourselves on. I'm not going to go through this complete list, but we fully vetted out each of these different areas and how you can gauge across these threads here on where you're performing. Well, what makes this unique is that everything we're seeing here, when you score yourself, is bound by a common component. Everything touches technology. Everything is connected. Everything has to do with security and compliance. So when we look at the 8 key functional areas and we focus on production technology integration, this is fantastic. This is a path that you need to get to, but there's a key item that you can't lose sight of in any of these threads, and specifically in production technology integration. And that is the concept of cyber security and unfortunately being hacked or being held ransom. I'm going to turn over the discussion now to my colleague, Brian Nichols, and Brian is going to walk through the Securing Industry 4.0. Brian?
So talking about cybersecurity, when looking at how an organizations view their cybersecurity capabilities, we actually kind of view ourselves in the industry hand in hand. So when an organization has made significant investments in cybersecurity, it's because they think the rest of the industry has made those similar investments. But when a company doesn't make the investments, when they've chosen to maybe live from a less mature state, it's because they believe as an industry, everybody's less mature. So we kind of self-realize what we think our peer group is doing. And to kind of put that in perspective, 60% of manufacturing companies had a security incident in the last 12 months. However, only 30% of those actually had an incident response program in place. So we're talking about a significant majority of manufacturing organizations have had a security incident, but a very small portion actually have the processes, the tools, the capabilities in place to appropriately and efficiently respond to a security incident. Which is very interesting when you think about the last point here, which is 70% of organizations surveyed actually consider security and an attack on their IIoT, industrial control system infrastructure, highly likely. So there seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what we believe and then what we're actually doing. A couple other stats to kind of talk through. First being is that it's actually interesting as organizations and these people always felt that, well, the bad actors were going after the largest organizations. So again, you think about really Equifax, we think about Home Depot, we think about Target. But in reality, what we're seeing is that 2/3 of all cyber attacks are occurring on small and medium-sized businesses. Not just that, but in how long it takes you to identify if you've actually been breached. Most organizations are reporting that it takes a month average to identify that a data breach has occurred. That means that the bad actors have been in your network, monitoring your communications, monitoring your communications with customers, monitoring your systems, the data, and getting to know you sometimes better than you know yourself from a technical perspective. And that's really interesting because the next things we're going to talk about is really about the breaches that have occurred or some of the ransomware attacks. So I'm going to start with Stuxnet. So Stuxnet malware is really focused on the nuclear program for Iran. And it's something I think we've all heard. And while it was specifically targeting the PLCs, of course, used to control machinery and industrial processes, including gas centrifuges for separating nuclear material, it had kind of a singular purpose because it was really, again, while the countries may not admit it, but it was really a collaborative effort between the United States, the UK, and Israel to really hamper some of the nuclear progress that Iran was making. But what continues to see is that the next one on this list, black energy, is actually an interesting one because it attacked the Ukrainian power grid back in 2015. And it kind of is, it's the first known successful cyber attack on a nation's power grid, which is really both scary and kind of interesting to see that what power this has. And hackers were able to actually successfully compromise 3 energy distribution companies in Ukraine and temporarily disrupt their energy supply to the end consumers. Now, one thing's really interesting here is that this was a multi-phased attack. You had a spear phishing email that led to the installation of this black energy malware, which then compromised the network of these Ukrainian energy distribution companies. Then those bad actors getting into that network then compromised the SCADA systems within that network and disabled a variety of redundancies that those companies had put in place to protect them from something like this occurring. Compromising those SCADA systems then actually allowed them the ability to shut the substations off remotely. They didn't just stop there. They then deployed more malware to actually destroy system files within the network that they identified. And, but wait, there's more. And they mounted a denial of service attack to cause confusion with the end consumers because they couldn't actually reach those energy providers to get updates on the blackout and to understand when their power would be restored. That is really key because you can see here how the attack progresses and all of the objectives that this hacking group basically had to significantly disrupt kind of these Ukrainian power distribution companies and impact the end consumers, causing confusion. But then it continues. WannaCry. I think most everybody has really heard it, but what really is interesting is WannaCry was worldwide, whereas Stuxnet and the Black Energy became very focused in 2 countries. WannaCry was a worldwide cyber attack. It targeted older Windows operating systems, encrypted their data, and demanded ransom payments in Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency. Now, there's a few really fun things here. Interesting fact is that the WannaCry ransomware was actually propagated through a vulnerability known as Eternal Blue. Now, Eternal Blue was actually an exploit developed by the NSA. And the details about Eternal Blue were actually leaked on the dark web by a group called the Shadow Brokers. And that was actually leaked a few months before the attack occurred. Not only that, but while all of this was occurring, Microsoft had actually already released patches to mitigate the risk. So organizations that had strong processes to properly manage and patch their systems weren't vulnerable. But organizations that didn't have those capabilities got hit hard. So it kind of shows you when we talk about there's a lot of threats out there. But if you're doing some of those right things, taking a proactive approach, you're actually going to be protecting yourself from a lot of those threats. Again, one of the other items is on here is there's an interesting area because in 2018, a new variant of WannaCry came out. And that forced the Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company, TSMC, to temporarily shut down several of its chip manufacturing factories as it spread over 10,000 of their machines in their facilities. Again, there's very interesting things that kind of go on because if you think about this, a lot of these things have been attributed to various nation states. But as you see at the last item on here, Honda, just 2 days ago, that it was announced that Honda actually experienced a ransomware attack, impacting their business operations globally. That includes both their business side as well as their manufacturing side. And there's reports, now again, this is kind of very early on, this only happened 2 days ago. There's reports that this is part of the Eakins malware. Hackers are funny. Eakins is actually snake spelled backwards. But that was designed to target industrial control systems. But unlike a lot of the previous things that we've talked about here that have been largely state-sponsored, this actually looks like the work of a private hacking group that's motivated for financial gain. It's really interesting to see how things have evolved. That manufacturing originally, the threats to it were to disrupt the business itself, and now we're starting to see that this is focused more on the financial gain aspect, which is actually what we're going to see some here. So Target, we all know, had a breach a few years ago, compromising tens of millions of credit cards of their customers. Interesting things is that these attackers got in from an HVAC company that Target was working with, and got in through the HVAC systems that were actually running an old vulnerable version of Java. And that allowed them the singular compromise point to get into the Target network, to then propagate throughout the network and compromise the point of sale devices that swipe the credit cards in order to get that credit card information. And again, sell that information on the dark web for financial gain. We'll see at the next one, the LC Industries. They discovered a breach of about 3,800 of their customers, again, for financial gain, but this also impacted their relationship with the Department of Defense. Again, hackers looking for financial gain also have significant impacts on businesses and who they have relationships with. You're going to see that in this next one with FACC, who's an Airbus supplier that was breached by hackers posing as their CEO and stole $54 million. Now, something that's been happening recently is a strong focus of fraudulent wire transfers, where people, where a bad actor will potentially pose as it's a CEO, a CIO, a CFO, and get people to send them wire transfers to fake invoices, fake bank accounts, such. But seeing that this one was somebody actually posing as the CEO and stealing over $50 million, pretty significant. So there's a lot here that keeps going on, where we focus on how manufacturing organizations are being disrupted, are having impacts not only to their business, but then to their financials, and having their relationships disrupted because of these cyber attacks. So as we continue to focus on IIoT, you're going to see the exponential growth of these areas, that these devices are manufactured for cost rather than security, that there is a variety of different security standards. And so one device may not meet the same standards used for other devices. And these devices can create gaps in your network that you may be unaware of. One very large botnet that was actually put together by malicious actors about 5-6 years ago actually disrupted a good portion of the internet. It was called the Mirai botnet. And it was made up of these types of devices. It was made up of DVRs and home video cameras. And basically, these devices were set up with default usernames and passwords that were never changed, that got leaked online and led to the compromise of these devices. Security is a shared responsibility. When a manufacturer builds the device, they have to think of security as a component of that build and that production of that device. But you, as the organization implementing and deploying that device within your network, also have to consider the security of how you're going to maintain that device. Are you going to restrict what that device can communicate with? And how are you going to update and secure that device over the lifetime of it being on your network? These devices are so difficult because of the volume. One study that you'll see at the bottom believes that the IoT devices are actually going to outnumber humans 3-to-1 within the next three to 5 years. It's the volume, it's the number of devices that we have that are connected that also poses one of the greatest risks. So something to really kind of, again, think about from the standpoint of manufacturing is that according to an AT&T study, manufacturing was reported to be the second most attacked industry from a cybersecurity perspective. Again, we've had other industries, healthcare, financial services, both strongly kind of under the thumb of cyber threats. But manufacturing over the last years has really kind of vaulted up there because things we'll talk about later on, but because of the older devices, the older systems that are now being network connected. And manufacturers, they're eager to keep costs low, kind of setting the bar at what is minimal. What's the minimal requirements I need to meet in order to get my products out? And so when we think about where this falls, IoT strategies really fall outside of what most people believe to be security strategies with limited governance. And so what we see is business disruption, that intellectual property theft, ransomware, fraudulent financial transactions, and breaches of these trusted relationships. Final stat down here is that what you'll actually see is that for the automotive industry, that on average, cyber crime costs almost $16 million per year per organization within the automotive industry.
And Brian, I would like to highlight and to put it into like a global perspective. In 2015, the cost was about $500 billion in damage. Today, it's approaching $6 trillion.
It's significant. And Peter, you're absolutely right. We are seeing that cybercrime pays. We are seeing that it actually pays to be a criminal. And one of the hardest parts on this is that most of these criminals are outside of US jurisdiction. They're outside of the reach of our laws, and they're usually in countries that may not always have favorable relationships, may not always be willing to pursue those criminals or extradite those criminals so that they can be tried in the US. And so we continue to see a growth in cybercrime because it pays, and they're being very successful at it.
Yeah, we also see that a majority of the organizations that are impacted by cybercrime have less than 1,000 employees, like 60+%.
Yeah. That's what I said. It's cyber criminals don't really care how large you are. They're focused on, are you willing to pay? What most larger organizations early on, they started adding cyber insurance to cover the cost of this. They also started, again, beefing up their cyber teams and focusing on securing their networks. But a lot of smaller organizations just haven't made that transition into the investments that have to be made to protect them. And so they're easier targets. And the idea is, even though the payday may not be as big going after a smaller organization, when you can go after more and you have a higher success rate, it actually pays more in the end to go after a smaller organization.
Yep. And we've had situations where small clients have been ransomware, right? And the criminals are, well, pay us or don't pay us, you're still locked down, right? So it's out there, it happens, and I'm sure, unfortunately, there's some individuals on this call that probably have experienced it. And what can we, what can you do as an organization to really get ahead of this?
Yeah, one of the issues many of our clients have is backups and the ability to restore their systems. Many organizations, they sit there and they think, okay, well, I've got my data backed up of my ERP system, or I've got my client files backed up, and that's great. But what we really see is when you've got other older systems that haven't had that same level of kind of resiliency built in, you can be basically out for weeks, for months, and that really costs organizations. So what we wanted to talk about was a roadmap on how you can leverage IIoT and help to actually enhance your overall kind of business operations and security. We look at 6 different steps: identifying the pain, inventorying your existing tools, evaluating your options, piloting and implementing your cyber threat, something we'll get to here in a bit, where you're actually taking that proactive approach. Rinse and but all of this, even though step 5 is cyber specific, all of this has cybersecurity embedded throughout. So identifying the pain. So we all know bottlenecks really slow down the efficiency of the manufacturing organization. Concerns around capacity, overwhelmed labor, changes in requirements, missed shipments around counts or weights, downtime, even just down to misinformation, the accuracy of the information, and diminishing supply and some skilled trades have changed, just have really caused a lot of pain for a lot of organizations. But when we don't just think about pain from a business standpoint, think about pain from an IT and a security standpoint. Being able to identify your cyber risks. What are the threats that are potentially going to impact your operations? As we've seen, those threats come from a variety of different sources, and they're potentially just as impactful as concerns around labor shortages or misshipments or inaccurate data. How you inventory what you have in your environment today. Organizations have grown and the environments have grown more complex. PLCs, HMIs, handheld scanners, scales, robots. I mean, the tools on the shop floor have grown in number and complexity. And a lot of them, again, are network connected today. And you've got your IT infrastructure, the personal computers that are both used on the shop floor as well as in the back end corporate environment. You've got networks, both wired networks as well as wireless networks. Tablets, handhelds, you've got TVs connected. There are so many IT assets within an organization. And how those devices all communicate can be very complicated, and sometimes they don't communicate together very well. You got software, whether it's ERP systems, SCADA systems, third-party software that's running, whether it's on the network or running within a device itself. You got staff that you're managing. All of these, trying to be able to understand your technology assets, your people assets, and you also need to consider the vulnerabilities associated with those. Again, security has to be thought of throughout every process of these roadmap. But not just looking at the vulnerabilities, because there's a lot of capabilities your tools may already have. So look at the security features. What's the functionality? Have you enabled it? What does your system actually allow for encrypted communication between devices? Or is it older where it doesn't actually secure those communications? And suddenly that traffic is viewable over the network, can be intercepted by anybody on the network. So really creating an inventory saying, all right, here's what my existing tool set looks like. Here's the risks associated with those tool sets, but also here's some features that I may not have even known that were available to me that I could start to leverage. Then evaluate your options. Filling minor gaps, identifying significant missing pieces, looking at who you have partnerships with, who your suppliers are, what kind of architecture you've implemented, how scalable is your environment, how manageable is it? Do you have the capability to manage your IT infrastructure internally? Do you need to be hiring out to third-party service providers, third-party developers? Do you have the capabilities to run support and diagnostics on these tools? Cost structure is a huge component. Looking across the options to really understand where you need to make investments and what's going to be that return on investment. And you need to, again, cross all of this, consider those cybersecurity risks when you're identifying your investments. So when we think about how we evaluate our options, what really comes down to is focusing on what is right for the business, thinking strategically, but also what are the threats? What are the things that we need to consider as we start to better secure our environment and our infrastructure? Piloting and implementation. Most people look at it in two ways. You've got, do you address your biggest pain points first, or do you focus on low-hanging fruit? Everyone likes the quick wins. Everyone wants to show benefits quickly and make progress. But sometimes the investments you make in low-hanging fruit may not be as fruitful as the investments you make in managing those bigger pain points. Other side is the vendors that you're talking to with these solutions. They want to sell you a product. And so really work with them to explore low-cost or no-cost demos, proof of concepts. The idea is they're going to sell you a silver bullet. They may sell you that it works perfectly all the time. But as we know, in reality, that is very rarely the case. So ask them to do a proof of concept within your environment. Set something up on your network so that you can see how it runs day to day. Looking at being able to do that is going to really make the larger investments that you need to make much more palatable, and you're actually going to be able to see the benefits much more quickly from it. Speaking of those large investments, start small, don't eat the elephant in one bite. You have to take small little bites off of your biggest problems. Sign dedicated project champions. This is both at a top leadership level as well as an operational level. Who in executive management is going to really champion this initiative? But also, who at an operational level is really going to ensure that the day-to-day gets done and that progress is made? You want to demonstrate those benefits, and you want to communicate and give feedback quickly without a concern when there's negative feedback to be given. As I've said, all of those products you're looking at have security features that you can enable. So enable those security features to ensure that you're getting the benefits. So one thing is we've seen a lot of clients, particularly in their back end, go to the cloud, AWS, Azure. They have a lot of security capabilities built into their tools. But you actually have to be the one to check that box. You have to be the one to enable that feature to ensure that the communication of that data and when it's stored and processed is done securely. So while the vendor gives you the features you need, it's your responsibility to actually enable them. There's interesting things here because when we think about how you actually go through and create this roadmap and pilot these implementations, there may be overlapping priorities, both from a business standpoint as well as a security standpoint. Truly take a hard look before you start to reduce the security of your investments just by trying to accelerate getting the investment in the first place. Because a hacker only needs one hole in order to breach your systems. Cyber threat hunting. Now, this is a fun one. So this is where we take a proactive approach and we go on the offensive, where you're not just thinking about the controls that you need to put in place and how you're going to secure the systems that you have, but you're actually actively looking to see if a breach has occurred within your environment. Remember when I said that it takes an organization over 6 months on average to identify if they've had a data breach? This is the type of capability that allows you to bring that down significantly. There are what they call indicators of compromise. And so when you start looking at whether malware is on your systems, and you're looking at whether misconfiguration in a firewall or some other Windows system has been compromised, you're looking for an indicator of compromise. And so you're searching the network, you're searching the systems and the devices to see if something like that has occurred. The other side to this is when you're actually looking to try to basically do ethical hacking and you're trying to actually breach your own systems to see if there's a way for a hacker to get in. Something that's really interesting is as a lot of organizations have put investments into their technology 15, 20 years ago. And sometimes those vendors of those solutions go out of business. And so a lot of manufacturing is being run on Windows 2000, Windows XP devices. And when those devices were what we call air-gapped, when they weren't connected to a network, when they were connected directly to one system, there was security there. But IT professionals whose job has now become not only to monitor the corporate network, but also to monitor the manufacturing network, the production network, are making it more efficient for them to do their job and have networked, have bridged those two. Suddenly, a air-gapped system that has no external connectivity, because it's now been bridged to the internal network, now has internet connectivity. And it's those systems that potentially lead to a significant portion of the compromises that manufacturing companies are seeing. Again, there's investments that have to be made to ensure that the threats that an organization is facing can be mitigated And sometimes it's our own actions that cause us to face various threats and different threats.
Hey, Brian.
Yes,
Question
Peter.
on the recent Honda ransomware attack. Do you believe that that was an instantaneous attack that just happened? Or is there a possibility that the bad actors have been in Honda systems for a while?
I think the bad actors have been in Honda for a while. I think when we look at what organizations are facing today, very rarely does one action equate to an immediate reaction. That we're seeing that the compromise of an email account or the compromise of a username or user's credentials is only the first step that an attacker takes to get into the network. The remaining steps is the reconnaissance that they do. They start to look around the network. They start to understand where systems are, where the data is, how can they impact, what are they trying to accomplish, whether it's for financial gain or just disruption. They are taking their time because they don't want to be noticed. They don't want an alert to go up where they get noticed and found out before they can meet their objective. And so the compromise of a user's credentials that leads to the compromise in a data breach usually are very far apart from a timeline perspective, because these attackers are going low, they're going slow so that they go unnoticed before they're ready to basically take over your systems for financial gain. The last section in this roadmap is rinse and repeat, just like you're told to do with your shampoo. The idea is that to evaluate best practices, to understand changes in the environment, to more quickly scale, to have easier maintenance and upgrades, and actually look forward at what your next pain points are going to be. Everything changes. Yeah. The only constant is change. And so what we're looking for is we're looking for organizations to be always monitoring, always moving, always understanding what's changing in the industry, what's changing within their organization, and particularly with cybersecurity, what are the new threats? What are the new ways organizations are getting compromised, and how are you protecting yourself against that? Reassess your security risks and execute on those risk mitigation activities on a continuous basis. This isn't just about doing an annual risk assessment. This is about looking at your risks continuously. So, to recap, the technology that organizations are implementing today has to be strategically aligned to the goals of the business and carefully approached, because there are new risks that are coming. We really only focused on kind of one of those 7, and there are a lot more in that grouping to really focus on holistically. Next point is layer security into every decision. We call it security by design. And the idea is, as you are maturing your environment, as you're maturing your products and your capabilities, security gets built in to every decision that you are making. And before you compromise on security, really think what that impact could be.
Don't make security an afterthought.
Exactly. Bolting security on at the end makes it less secure, makes it less reliable, and adds additional cost. So if you think of it up front and you build it into your design, It's more secure, it's more efficient, and it's less costly. To leave you with a final question, how prepared are you? When was the last time you looked at your pain points? When was the last time you looked at the security of your environment, of the technology that you have in place, of those partners and suppliers that you work with? How prepared are you if something were to occur? Are you in that 30% that has an incident response program? Are you in that 70% that doesn't? What is that impact going to look like if something were to occur? If you're in one of that 60% that have a security incident next year?
Is your security level 1 or level 5 on the maturity model?
Exactly.
Well, thank you for your time. We hope you enjoy the rest of the virtual conference, and we're here to answer any questions you may have.